Welcome to Marple Whispers, I'm Sean. Tell me, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments along with how you liked the story. I reply to every single one of you. Now let's step into the mystery. A luxurious train hurtles through the Egyptian desert from Cairo to Alexandria, carrying a cast of enigmatic strangers. A blustering colonel, a glamorous widow dripping in pearls, a nervous young doctor, a scarred Russian exile, a sharp-tongued archaeologist, and a ruthless industrialist with his shadowy secretary. Among them sits Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming English spinster with eyes that see through souls, knitting quietly as secrets simmer. But when dawn breaks, a scream shatters the silence. The industrialist lies dead in his locked compartment, poisoned by cyanide, a cryptic note warning of a serpent in their midst. Whispers of blackmail, hidden heirs, forged letters, and buried grudges unravel as alibis crack and motives clash. Is it revenge from a cheated rival? A desperate inheritance grab? Or a long-festering betrayal? Join Miss Marple on this riveting rail ride of deception, where every glance hides a dagger, and human nature's darkest threads weave a deadly web. Who will be unmasked before Alexandria's shores? Chapter 1. The invitation and the journey begins. In the sleepy hollow of Netherwood Parva, where the thatched cottages huddled like gossiping old maids, and the church spire pierced the sky with a quiet authority, Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her fingers deftly manoeuvring the knitting needles through a skein of soft wool. The village was a place of predictable rhythms, the milkman's cart clattering at dawn, the postman's bicycle bell announcing the midday mail. But on this crisp autumn morning, the ordinary was about to be disrupted. The letter arrived with the faint scent of exotic spices clinging to its envelope, postmarked from Cairo. Miss Marple slit it open with her silver letter opener, her mild blue eyes scanning the elegant script. It was from Lady Evelyn Hargreaves. A woman whose path had crossed hers years ago at a garden party in London, where whispers of scandal had swirled around Evelyn's late husband, the archaeologist Lord Hargreaves. My dearest Jane, the letter began, the sands of Egypt have a way of unearthing more than just ancient relics. I've taken a villa by the sea in Alexandria, and I insist you join me. The Mediterranean breeze will chase away that tiresome rheumatism of yours. I've booked your passage, a steamer to Port Said, then the express train from Cairo on the 15th. Do come. There's intrigue in the air, and your sharp mind would be a delight. Miss Marple folded the letter thoughtfully. Lady Evelyn was not one for idle invitations. Her words carried an undercurrent, like the faint ripple on a pond that hinted at deeper currents below. In Netherwood Parva, Miss Marple had seen enough of human nature to know that such summons often masked troubles, perhaps a wayward nephew entangled in debts, or a servant with sticky fingers. She packed her valise with practical items, a warm shawl, her favourite teacups, for one could never trust foreign china, and of course her knitting bag. As she boarded the local train to London, she couldn't shake the feeling that this journey might unravel more than just yarn. The voyage across the Mediterranean was a blur of salty air and monotonous waves, broken only by the chatter of fellow passengers, tourists with guidebooks and businessmen with briefcases. Miss Marple spent her days on deck, observing the subtle dances of flirtation and rivalry among them, much like the village fetes back home, where alliances shifted over cups of tea. Cairo greeted her with a cacophony of horns and the spicy aroma of street vendors hawking falafel and dates. she navigated the bustling streets to the grand railway station, its domed arches echoing with the calls of porters and the hiss of steam engines. The train to Alexandria was a marvel of modern engineering, its carriages gleaming in polished mahogany and brass, with plush velvet seats that invited one to sink into luxury. Miss Marple settled into her compartment, her window offering views of the Nile's lush delta fading into arid plains. The platform teemed with life, veiled women balancing baskets, soldiers in crisp uniforms, and travellers from afar clutching tickets like talismans. First to catch her eye was Colonel Archibald Bannister, a burly figure with a moustache like a hedge in need of trimming, barking orders at a hapless porter. "Damn fool! Handle that with care. It's my campaign medals from the Boer War." His voice boomed with the authority of a man accustomed to command. Yet Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand, perhaps from old wounds or something more recent, like the village doctor in Netherwood who hid his nerves behind bluster. Seated across the aisle was Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, a vision in emerald silk, her neck adorned with a cascade of pearls that caught the light like dewdrops. She fanned herself languidly, her painted lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A widow, Miss Marple surmised from the black edging on her handkerchief. Recently bereaved, perhaps, and seeking distraction in travel. There was a fragility about her, like fine porcelain that might shatter under pressure, reminding Miss Marple of the Netherwood spinster who masked her loneliness with extravagant hats. Young Dr. Reginald Thorpe hurried aboard next, his medical bag clutched tightly, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he scanned his ticket. He was pale, with the harried look of a man burdened by secrets, debts from medical school, or a failed practice. He nodded curtly to the conductor before vanishing into his seat, fidgeting with a small vial from his pocket. Miss Marple's mind flitted to the apothecary's assistant back home, whose nervous habits had once betrayed a pilfered prescription. Then came Mr. Victor Krasnov, a tall Russian with a scar slicing across his cheek like a lightning bolt, his overcoat bulky despite the heat. He moved with the stealth of a panther, his dark eyes darting suspiciously. An émigré, no doubt, fleeing revolutions or worse. His accent, when he murmured to the porter, carried the weight of exile. In Netherwood Parva, Miss Marple had known a similar soul, a Polish refugee whose guarded demeanour hid tales of betrayal. Miss Eliza Croft, the archaeologist, bustled in with a satchel brimming with maps and trowels, her tweed suit practical and her tongue sharp. "Out of my way, you oaf!" she snapped at a lingering vendor. She plopped down opposite Miss Marple, her face weathered by sun and digs, eyes gleaming with the fervour of one who unearthed buried truths. "Heading to Alexandria for a symposium," she confided unprompted, her voice laced with disdain for amateurs meddling in ruins. In the adjoining compartment, the wealthy industrialist Sir Henry Langford made a grand entrance, his portly frame squeezed into a tailored suit, a gold watch chain glinting across his waistcoat. He was accompanied by his secretary, Mr. Paul Denton, a slender young man with slicked-back hair and a deferential bow that seemed forced. Sir Henry's laughter echoed heartily as he greeted fellow passengers. But Miss Marple caught the flash of unease in Denton's eyes. A subordinate with grievances, perhaps, like the underpaid clerk in the village shop who tallied resentments with every ledger entry. As the whistle blew and the train lurched forward, the landscape blurred into a tapestry of palms and pyramids silhouetted against the setting sun. Miss Marple's needles clicked in steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the wheel's clatter. She watched Mrs. Fortescue's hand tremble slightly as she adjusted her pearls, Sir Henry's flushed cheeks as he whispered urgently to Denton, and Krasnov's fingers tapping an impatient code on the armrest. In the quiet of her mind, she pondered these strangers, bound together on this iron serpent snaking toward the sea. Human nature, she knew, was a puzzle of motives and masks, and already the pieces were shifting into place. Little did she suspect how swiftly the game would turn deadly. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dining Car. The train to Alexandria sliced through the Egyptian dusk, its wheels humming a relentless song against the rails, while the horizon bled crimson into the encroaching night. Inside the dining car, a masterpiece of Art Deco elegance with its polished teak panels and crystal chandeliers, the passengers gathered for dinner, their voices weaving a tapestry of civility over hidden tensions. Miss Jane Marple, seated at a corner table with a view of the entire carriage, sipped her mint tea, her knitting needles resting momentarily in her lap. Her mild blue eyes, deceptively gentle, darted from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every glance, much as she had done at Netherwood Parver's church bazaars, where secrets spilled as freely as tea from a chipped pot. The car buzzed with the clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation, punctuated by the occasional jolt of the train. At the central table, Sir Henry Langford held court, his voice booming like a foghorn over the chatter. A portly man with a florid complexion, he wore his wealth as ostentatiously as his diamond cufflinks, which caught the chandelier's light like tiny stars. "Egypt's the future, mark my words," he declared, spearing a morsel of lamb kofta. "My cotton mills will revolutionize this blasted desert. Fortunes to be made." His eyes gleamed with the fervor of a man who saw empires in every ledger. Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, seated to his right, leaned forward, her emerald gown shimmering as she toyed with her pearl necklace. "Oh, Sir Henry, how thrilling!" she purred, her smile practiced, but her fingers betraying a slight tremor as they grazed her wine-glass. Miss Marple noted the widow's calculated charm, reminiscent of a Netherwood widow who had once ensnared a local squire with similar artifice, only to be undone by a forged IOU. Mrs. Fortescue's eyes lingered too long on Sir Henry's cufflinks, as if weighing their worth against her own precarious fortunes. Across the table, Colonel Archibald Bannister, his moustache bristling like a well-groomed hedge, grunted disapproval. "Fortunes, bah! This country's a powder keg. Too many foreigners stirring the pot." His military bearing was unmistakable, yet Miss Marple caught the way his hand clenched his fork, as if gripping a bayonet from his Boer War days. A man of action, perhaps, but one whose temper might outrun his judgment, like the retired sergeant in Netherwood who once smashed a pub window over a slight. Dr. Reginald Thorpe, the young physician, sat quietly, his spectacles fogging slightly from the steam of his soup. He was pale, almost translucent, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. I think I'll retire early," he stammered, pushing his plate away, half-eaten. "Bit of a headache." His abrupt departure drew a raised eyebrow from Miss Eliza Croft, the archaeologist, who sat beside Miss Marple, her tweed suit a stark contrast to the dining car's opulence. "Nervous sort, isn't he?" she muttered, her voice sharp as a trowel. "Probably botched a surgery and fled to Egypt to escape the scandal." Her cynicism reminded Miss Marple of the village schoolmistress, whose tart tongue masked a keen eye for human failings. Mr. Victor Krasnov, the enigmatic Russian, occupied a solitary table by the window, his scar a pale slash against his tanned skin. He ate sparingly, his dark eyes fixed on the passing dunes. Though Miss Marple noticed his fingers drumming a silent, restless rhythm. A man on edge, she thought, like the Polish émigré in Netherwood, who carried a knife and a grudge from his homeland. Krasnov's isolation was deliberate, as if he feared or expected prying eyes. The conductor, Ahmed, a wiry Egyptian with a quick smile, glided between tables, refilling glasses and exchanging pleasantries in flawless English. Miss Marple engaged him briefly, asking about the train's schedule. "We reach Alexandria by dawn, madam," he said, his eyes flickering towards Sir Henry's table, though some passengers seem eager to arrive sooner. His tone held a hint of amusement, or perhaps caution, and Miss Marple filed it away, recalling how the Netherwood postman's gossip had once unravelled a theft. As the meal progressed, undercurrents surfaced like ripples in a pond. Sir Henry's secretary, Mr. Paul Denton, hovered at his employer's elbow, his sleek demeanour marred by a tightness around his mouth. When Sir Henry waved him off to fetch more wine, Denton's step faltered, and Miss Marple caught a flash of resentment in his eyes. Familiar, she thought, from the underpaid clerk in Netherwood's grocer, who sabotaged the till out of spite. Denton returned, murmuring something to Sir Henry, who flushed and snapped, "Not now, man." The exchange was brief but charged, and Miss Marple's needles resumed their clicking, her mind weaving connections. Miss Croft, emboldened by a second glass of wine, leaned toward Miss Marple. "That Langford's a menace," she confided, her voice low but venomous. "His mills are trampling my dig site near Rosetta. Priceless artifacts crushed for his wretched cotton. And that secretary of his, Denton, looks like he's plotting mutiny." Her words were blunt, her indignation raw, yet Miss Marple sensed a deeper grievance, perhaps a professional rivalry turned personal, akin to the village gardener who poisoned a rival's roses over a flower show slight. Mrs. Fortescue, meanwhile, excused herself briefly, her absence noted by Colonel Bannister, who muttered to no one in particular, "Flighty woman, probably off to powder her nose, or her debts." His comment drew a chuckle from Sir Henry, but Miss Marple observed how Mrs. Fortescue, upon returning, avoided the Colonel's gaze, her hand clutching her handbag a fraction too tightly. A debt, perhaps, or a secret held over her head, like the Netherwood seamstress who hid her gambling losses behind a veneer of respectability. As dessert, a delicate baklava dripping with honey was served. The atmosphere thickened. Sir Henry, now slightly inebriated, boasted of a new deal, a venture to make kings jealous, while Krasnov's head turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Dr. Thorpe, reappearing briefly to retrieve his forgotten coat, seemed to shrink from Sir Henry's voice, his fingers brushing the vial in his pocket before he retreated again. Miss Marple's tea grew cold as she watched, her mind tracing patterns, ambition, fear, resentment, all ingredients in a recipe she knew too well from village dramas. The dining car emptied slowly, passengers drifting to their compartments as the train plunged deeper into the bay night. Miss Marple lingered, her knitting a pretext to observe the stragglers. Ahmed cleared the tables, his movements swift, but his eyes darting to the corridor where Sir Henry and Denton exchanged heated whispers. "Keep your voice down," Sir Henry hissed, the words carrying just far enough for Miss Marple's sharp ears. Denton's reply was inaudible, but his posture, stiff, almost defiant, spoke volumes. Retiring to her berth, Miss Marple lay awake, the train's rhythm a lullaby that failed to soothe. The muffled argument from Sir Henry's compartment echoed again, sharper now, followed by an abrupt silence. In Netherwood Parva, such silences often preceded revelations. A stolen brooch, a forged will, a whispered betrayal. As the train hurtled toward Alexandria, Miss Marple sensed the threads of a darker tapestry tightening, and she knew, with the certainty of one who had unravelled many a village mystery, that the journey was about to take a deadly turn. Chapter 3. The Discovery at Dawn. The first rays of dawn pierced the heavy curtains of the Alexandria-bound train, casting a golden glow over the desert sands that stretched endlessly beyond the windows. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels had lulled most passengers into an uneasy slumber. But Miss Jane Marple, ever alert to the subtleties of human behaviour, lay awake in her berth, her mind sifting through the evening's observations. The dining car's veiled tensions, Mrs. Fortescue's trembling fingers, Mr. Krasnov's guarded glances, the sharp exchange between Sir Henry and his secretary, lingered like the aftertaste of bitter tea. In Netherwood Parva, such undercurrents often heralded trouble, and Miss Marple sensed the train was no different. A piercing scream shattered the morning's quiet, slicing through the carriage like a shard of glass. It came from the direction of Sir Henry Langford's compartment, a private suite at the end of the first-class corridor. Miss Marple, wrapping her shawl about her shoulders, stepped into the narrow passageway, her slippers silent on the carpet. Other passengers emerged, bleary-eyed and dishevelled. Colonel Bannister, his nightshirt hastily tucked into trousers, barking for order. Miss Eliza Croft, her hair in curlers but her eyes sharp with curiosity. And Dr. Reginald Thorpe, clutching his medical bag, his face ashen. The conductor, Ahmed, reached the compartment first, his keys jangling as he unlocked the door. A gasp escaped him as he pushed it open, revealing a scene that froze the gathering crowd. Sir Henry Langford slumped against the window, his portly frame unnaturally still, his eyes staring blankly at the passing dunes. His gold watch chain gleamed incongruously against his crumpled suit, and a half-empty glass of whisky rested on the table beside him, its amber contents catching the dawn light. No blood stained the scene. No signs of struggle marred the pristine compartment. Only the faint, acrid scent of almonds hung in the vague air. Dr. Thorpe pushed forward, his professional instincts overriding his visible unease. Kneeling beside the body, he pressed trembling fingers to Sir Henry's wrist, then sniffed the glass cautiously. "Poison," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Cyanide, I'd wager, by the smell. He's been dead some hours." His spectacles slipped down his nose as he glanced nervously at the onlookers, as if expecting accusation. Colonel Bannister, assuming command with military brusqueness, ordered everyone back. "Stand clear! I was with Scotland Yard in my day. Leave this to me." His moustache quivered with authority, but Miss Marple noted the uncertainty in his eyes, reminiscent of a Netherwood constable who blustered through a burglary case only to miss the obvious. She edged closer, her small frame unassuming, and peered into the compartment. The window was sealed tight against the desert dust. The door had been locked from within, and a crumpled note protruded from Sir Henry's pocket, its edge just visible. "Most curious," she murmured, her voice soft as a breeze, yet her mind raced with possibilities. The passengers huddled in the corridor, their whispers a chorus of shock and suspicion. Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, clutched her pearls, her face pale beneath her rouge. "How dreadful!" she gasped, though Miss Marple caught the flicker of something, relief perhaps, in her eyes, like the Netherwood widow who wept crocodile tears at a rival's funeral. Mr. Victor Krasnov stood apart, his scarred face impassive, though his fingers curled tightly at his sides, betraying a tension Miss Marple recognized from a village poacher caught with a stolen pheasant. Miss Eliza Croft, ever pragmatic, pushed her curlers back and scoffed. Well, someone's done him in. Not surprised, Langford was a bully with a wallet. Her bluntness drew a sharp glance from Paul Denton, Sir Henry's secretary, who hovered at the edge of the group, his sleek hair dishevelled for once. "This is monstrous," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted how his eyes darted to the compartment as if searching for something or ensuring it remained unseen. Ahmed, recovering his composure, announced that the police would board at Alexandria, now just an hour away. Until then, the train was a sealed world, its passengers bound by suspicion. Colonel Bannister, eager to assert control, began questioning the group. "Who saw Langford last?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping over them like a general inspecting troops. Mrs. Fortescue admitted to lingering in the dining car with Sir Henry after dessert, discussing investment opportunities. Her voice was honeyed, but her fingers twisted her handkerchief, betraying nerves. Dr. Thorpe confessed to visiting Sir Henry's compartment earlier in the evening, prescribing a mild sedative for travel strain. "I left him alive and well," he insisted, though his pallor suggested otherwise. Krasnov, when pressed, shrugged. "I was in my berth, reading. I saw nothing." His accent was clipped, his eyes cold, and Miss Marple recalled a Netherwood stranger whose aloofness hid a pilfered silver spoon. Denton, trembling slightly, revealed a bombshell. "Sir Henry was drafting a new will last night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He intended to cut out his nephew in favour of others." The word hung heavily, and Miss Marple's needles, now retrieved from her berth, clicked softly as she pondered. A will, she knew from village disputes, was a spark that could ignite deadly fires. As the colonel blustered on, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the compartment. The whisky glass bore faint smudges, fingerprints perhaps, though too indistinct to be certain. The note in Sir Henry's pocket intrigued her most. Its crumpled edge suggested haste, or concealment. She recalled a case in Netherwood where a scribbled receipt, overlooked by the police, had unmasked a poisoner. "Might we preserve the scene?" she suggested mildly, her tone that of a kindly aunt. Colonel Bannister bristled but acquiesced, ordering Ahmed to guard the door. The passengers dispersed reluctantly, their faces a gallery of fear and calculation. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes tracing the compartment's details. The untouched bed, the half-open valise, the faint scratch on the window frame that seemed out of place. In Netherwood Parva, such anomalies, a misplaced teacup, a scuff on a doorstep, had often pointed to truth. Here, on this rattling train, the stakes were higher, the players more desperate. As the desert gave way to the green fringes of Alexandria's outskirts, Miss Marple returned to her berth, her mind weaving a tapestry of motives. Sir Henry's wealth had cast a long shadow, touching each passenger in ways yet unclear. Mrs. Fortescue's debts, Krasnov's enigmatic past, Denton's resentment, Thorpe's nervousness, Croft's vendetta, all were threads in a pattern she had seen before, in village halls and drawing rooms. The train's whistle sounded, a mournful cry in the dawn, and Miss Marple knew that before Alexandria's spires came into view, she must unravel the knot of this deadly puzzle, lest another strand snap in the night. Chapter 4. Interrogations and Alibis. The Alexandria-bound train rattled on, its wheels a relentless metronome against the backdrop of a desert. now softened by the pale light of dawn. The discovery of Sir Henry Langford's lifeless body had transformed the elegant carriage into a stage of suspicion, where every passenger played a part in a drama yet to be resolved. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the lounge car, now an impromptu interrogation chamber, watched the proceedings with her usual quiet attentiveness, her knitting needles clicking softly, a gentle counterpoint to the rising tension. Her mild blue eyes, sharp beneath their deceptive calm, missed nothing, much as they had in Netherwood Parva, when a pilfered silver tray had unmasked a deacon's greed. Colonel Archibald Bannister had taken charge with the bluster of a man who believed authority was his birthright. "We'll get to the bottom of this before the police muck it up," he declared, pacing the length of the lounge, his moustache quivering like a battle standard. The passengers, summoned one by one, sat uneasily on the velvet banquettes, their faces a gallery of unease and defiance. Ahmed, the conductor, stood by the door, his quick eyes darting between the group, ready to fetch or restrain as needed. Miss Marple noted his alertness, reminiscent of the Netherwood postman who always knew more than he let on. Mrs. Lydia Fortescue was called first, her silk dressing gown replaced by a tailored day dress, though her pearls still gleamed at her throat. "I dined with Sir Henry last night," she admitted, her voice soft but steady, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He spoke of his cotton mills, promised me a share in their profits. We parted at 10, and I retired to my berth." Her eyes flickered toward the window, avoiding the Colonel's stare, and Miss Marple caught the subtle tightening of her lips, like the village seamstress who lied about her gambling debts with similar poise. "Did you see anyone near his compartment?" Bannister pressed. Mrs. Fortescue shook her head, but her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief, betraying a nervousness that spoke louder than her words. Dr. Reginald Thorpe followed, his medical bag clutched like a shield. His spectacles fogged slightly as he faced the Colonel's barrage. "I gave Sir Henry a sedative, mild, perfectly safe, for his nerves," he stammered. "I left him at 9:30, quite alive." His voice cracked, and his eyes darted to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally. She recalled a Netherwood apothecary's assistant, whose trembling hands had once betrayed a tampered prescription. "And this cyanide you mentioned?" Bannister barked. Thorpe paled. "I carry such things for emergencies, but I'd never misuse them." His protest hung in the air, unconvincing, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow. Mr. Victor Krasnov, summoned next, stood tall and unyielding, his scar stark against his sallow skin. "I was in my berth, reading Pushkin," he said, his Russian accent thick with disdain. "Langford was nothing to me." But when Bannister pressed about a rumoured business rivalry, Krasnov's eyes flashed. "He cheated me in a deal 2 years ago. Cotton futures. But murder? I'm no fool to risk my neck for revenge." His fingers curled into fists, and Miss Marple thought of a Netherwood refugee, whose quiet demeanour hid a smouldering grudge over a stolen inheritance. Miss Eliza Croft strode in with the confidence of a woman who dug truths from ancient sands. "Langford was a blight," she declared, her tweed suit as uncompromising as her tone. "His mills ruined my Rosetta site, artifacts crushed under his machinery. But I'd have fought him in court, not poisoned his drink." Her bluntness drew a snort from Bannister, but Miss Marple saw the archaeologist's hands clench, a sign of passion that echoed the village gardener who sabotaged a rival's prize roses. "You were heard arguing with him last week," Bannister countered, citing Ahmed's gossip. Croft shrugged. Words, not cyanide. Check his enemies closer to home. Paul Denton, Sir Henry's secretary, was the last to face scrutiny, his sleek composure fraying at the edges. I worked late with Sir Henry, drafting letters, he said, his voice low. He was agitated about the new will. I left him at 11. His eyes flicked to Mrs. Fortescue, a glance so fleeting Miss Marple nearly missed it. "And this will?" Bannister demanded. Denton hesitated. It favoured a new beneficiary, someone on this train, though he wouldn't say who. The revelation stirred the room, and Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind racing to a Netherwood squire whose rewritten will had sparked a family feud. As the interrogations ended, the passengers dispersed, their alibis a fragile web of half-truths. Miss Marple remained, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The locked compartment, the sealed window, the cyanide-laced whiskey, all pointed to an intimate crime, one planned with care. She recalled a village poisoning, where a housekeeper's jealousy had turned a teapot deadly. Here, motives abounded, Mrs. Fortescue's financial desperation, Thorpe's access to poison, Krasnov's old grudge, Croft's professional rage, Denton's suppressed resentment. Yet the note in Sir Henry's pocket, "Beware the serpent in your midst," nagged at her, its biblical tone suggesting a deeper, perhaps personal betrayal. She approached Ahmed, who lingered by the bar, polishing glasses with practised ease. "Did you notice anything unusual last night?" she asked, her tone as gentle as a vicar's wife offering tea. Ahmed hesitated, then leaned closer. "I heard Sir Henry arguing with Mr. Denton near midnight. Something about missing funds." "Denton looked furious, madam, like a man ready to strike." His words were a thread, and Miss Marple tucked it away, remembering how a Netherwood maid's overheard quarrel had unmasked a thief. As the train neared Alexandria, the lounge car grew quiet, the passengers retreating to their berths or whispering in corners. Miss Marple's gaze fell on the whiskey glass, now secured by Ahmed at her suggestion. Its smudged surface hinted at carelessness, or deliberate obfuscation. She pondered the scratch on the window frame, an anomaly that tugged at her memory of a village burglary, where a forced latch had been the key to guilt. The new will, too, was a puzzle piece, its beneficiary a shadow yet to be named. The train's whistle sounded, a sharp cry in the morning air, and Miss Marple felt the weight of the hours ahead. In Netherwood Parva, she had learned that truth often hid in the mundane, a misplaced glove, a hurried glance. Here, among strangers bound by a shared journey, the clues were no less subtle, the stakes no less deadly. As the lounge car emptied, she resumed her knitting, her fingers steady, but her mind alight with the certainty that the serpent, whoever it was, had struck once and might strike again before the spires of Alexandria came into view. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The train to Alexandria pressed on through the fading light of late morning. Its polished carriages now steeped in a heavy silence, as if the desert itself held its breath. The discovery of Sir Henry Langford's poisoned body had cast a pall over the passengers, each retreating into their own thoughts, their glances sharp with suspicion. Miss Jane Marple sat in her berth, her knitting needles idle for once, her mind threading together the fragments of alibis and motives gleaned from the lounge car interrogations. The locked compartment, the cryptic note, the acrid scent of cyanide, all echoed the village intrigues of Netherwood Parva, where a misplaced letter or a whispered confidence had often unravelled the darkest secrets. Yet here, On this iron serpent winding toward the sea, the stakes felt higher, the shadows deeper. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Ahmed, the conductor, stood at her door, his usual brisk efficiency tempered by unease. "Madam, you asked about last night," he said, his voice low. "I remembered something else. Sir Henry and Mr. Denton were in the corridor after midnight, arguing fiercely. It was about money. Stolen funds, Sir Henry said. Denton's face, it was like a man cornered." Miss Marple nodded, her expression as serene as a vicar's wife at a tea party. But her mind sparked. In Netherwood, a similar overheard quarrel had exposed a butler's embezzlement. Here, Denton's resentment seemed a thread worth pulling. She thanked Ahmed and made her way to the lounge car, where the passengers had gathered again, their conversations stilted under Colonel Bannister's watchful eye. The Colonel, still clinging to his self-appointed role as investigator, was organizing a search of the passengers' compartments, citing evidence that won't wait for Alexandria's police. Miss Marple, settling into a corner with her knitting, observed the group. Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, her pearls now tucked beneath a high-necked blouse, avoided eye contact, her fingers fidgeting with a silver cigarette case. Mr. Victor Krasnov sat alone, his scarred face unreadable, though his eyes followed every movement like a hawk. Dr. Reginald Thorpe clutched his medical bag, his spectacles slipping as he muttered about the heat. Miss Eliza Croft, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal, shot occasional glares at Paul Denton, who paced nervously by the window. The search, conducted with Ahmed's reluctant assistance, yielded a trove of secrets. In Dr. Thorpe's compartment, Colonel Bannister found a small vial labelled potassium cyanide, tucked inside a locked case. Thorpe's face strained of colour. "It's for medical research," he protested, "used in minute doses for certain treatments. I swear I didn't touch Sir Henry's drink." His desperation reminded Miss Marple of a Netherwood chemist caught with a mislabelled bottle, his innocence proven only by a meticulous ledger. The Colonel, unconvinced, pocketed the vial, muttering about damning evidence. In Krasnov's berth, a crumpled letter surfaced, written in Russian and bearing an official seal. Miss Croft, peering over Bannister's shoulder, translated snippets. "It mentions espionage. Something about Langford exposing a deal to British authorities." Krasnov's eyes flashed with fury. "Lies!" he spat. "A forgery to ruin me. Langford was a snake, but I did not kill him." His vehemence echoed a Netherwood refugee's denial of theft, yet Miss Marple noted the letter's fresh ink, suggesting a recent planting. By whom, she wondered. Mrs. Fortescue's compartment revealed no poison, but a hidden drawer held a stack of IOUs, some signed to Sir Henry. "Debts from my late husband," she admitted tearfully when confronted. "Sir Henry offered to clear them, for a price." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple caught the shadow of shame, like the Netherwood widow who confessed to pawning heirlooms to cover a gambling vice. The price, Miss Marple suspected, was more than financial. Blackmail, perhaps, a motive as old as village gossip. Denton's berth offered little, a tidy desk, a few typed letters, but a locked diary caught Miss Marple's eye. When Bannister demanded it opened, Denton hesitated, then complied, revealing entries detailing Sir Henry's ruthless business tactics and Denton's growing bitterness. "He treated me like a servant," Denton muttered, his hands trembling. "But murder? Never." Miss Marple, watching closely, recalled a Netherwood clerk whose diary had betrayed a plot to sabotage his employer's shop. Miss Croft's compartment held only archaeological tools and maps. But her journal left open contained a scathing passage about Sir Henry's desecration of her dig site. "He deserved ruin, not death," she snapped when questioned, her eyes blazing. Miss Marple, knitting steadily, saw in Croft's passion the echo of a village gardener whose fury over a trampled flower-bed had led to a near-fatal feud. The note from Sir Henry's pocket, now retrieved by Ahmed under Miss Marple's gentle urging, was read aloud by the Colonel. "Beware the serpent in your midst." Its biblical tone stirred unease, and Miss Marple pondered its author. Was it a warning Sir Henry had received, or one he meant to deliver? In Netherwood, a similar note had unmasked a jealous suitor. Here, the serpent could be any among them. As the train neared the Mediterranean coast, Miss Marple sought out Dr. Thorpe, finding him alone in the dining car, staring at his untouched coffee. "You seem troubled, Doctor," she said kindly, her tone disarming. Hesitantly, he confessed a secret that made her pause. "Sir Henry was my father," he whispered, "illegitimate, cast off years ago. I came to Egypt hoping to reconcile, not to kill." His eyes brimmed with tears. And Miss Marple, recalling a Netherwood orphan's quest for family, saw truth in his pain, but also opportunity for betrayal. Later she cornered Mrs. Fortescue in the corridor, her gentle questions probing like a needle through fabric. "Those pearls," Miss Marple remarked, "they seem a heavy burden." Mrs. Fortescue flushed. "They're fakes," she admitted, "pawned to cover debts Sir Henry held over me. He knew too much about my past." Her voice faltered, hinting at secrets deeper than debts, and Miss Marple filed it away, thinking of a Netherwood seamstress whose false jewels hid a scandal. The train's rhythm slowed as it approached a signal stop, the coast now visible in glints of blue beyond the dunes. Miss Marple returned to her berth, her mind weaving a tapestry of revelations. Thorpe's hidden lineage, Fortescue's blackmail, Krasnov's forged letter, Denton's diary, Croft's vendetta. Each was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. The note's warning echoed in her thoughts, its serpent an unseen threat among them. In Netherwood Parva, she had learned that truth often lurked in the overlooked. A smudged glass, a scratched window, a whispered word. As the train jolted forward, she resumed her knitting, her fingers steady but her mind racing, certain that the shadows of the past held the key to the murder, and that the serpent was closer than anyone dared admit. Chapter 6. The Twist in the Tale. The Alexandria-bound train swayed through the gathering dusk, its polished carriages now cloaked in an air of foreboding, as if the desert sands outside whispered warnings of their own. The murder of Sir Henry Langford had tightened the threads of suspicion among the passengers, each glance and gesture heavy with unspoken accusations. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the lounge car with her knitting in her lap, watched the shifting dynamics with the quiet intensity of a Netherwood Parva matron piecing together a village scandal. Her mind, sharp as the needles she wielded, sifted through the morning's revelations. Dr. Thorpe's hidden lineage, Mrs. Fortescue's blackmail, the forged letter in Krasnov's birth, Denton's bitter diary, and Miss Croft's vendetta. Yet the cryptic note, "Beware the serpent in your midst," lingered like a riddle unsolved, its biblical weight hinting at a betrayal yet to be unmasked. A sudden jolt shook the train, followed by a grinding screech as it lurched to a halt. Ahmed, the conductor, appeared, his face taut with concern. "A signal failure, madam," he explained to Miss Marple, who had risen to steady herself. "We're delayed, perhaps an hour." Murmurs of unease rippled through the lounge, where the passengers had reconvened, their nerves frayed by the morning's discoveries. Colonel Bannister, ever the self-styled sleuth, seized the moment to assert control. "This delay's a chance to dig deeper," he bellowed, his moustache bristling. "Someone here knows more than they're letting on." Miss Marple's attention, however, was drawn to a new disturbance. A porter, breathless, reported a tampered brake valve in the engine car, discovered during a routine check. "Sabotage!" Colonel Bannister declared, his eyes narrowing on Mr. Victor Krasnov. "You, with that scar and your shifty ways, explain yourself." Krasnov's face darkened, his voice icy. "Accuse me again, Colonel, and you'll regret it. I was in my berth, not meddling with brakes." His denial was fierce, but Miss Marple noted the way his hand hovered near his coat pocket, a gesture she'd seen in a Netherwood poacher caught with a hidden snare. The sabotage stirred panic, and Miss Marple's thoughts raced to a village incident where a cut fence had masked a deeper crime. Could this be a distraction, or a second attempt to sow chaos? She approached Ahmed quietly, her voice as gentle as a churchwarden's wife offering scones. "Might I see the whiskey glass from Sir Henry's compartment?" she asked. Ahmed hesitated, then retrieved it, carefully wrapped in a cloth. Under the lounge's lamplight, Miss Marple examined it closely, noting the smudged fingerprints and a faint residue clinging to the rim. "Curious," she murmured, her mind flashing to a Netherwood poisoning where a teacup stain had betrayed the culprit. The passengers, now gathered under Bannister's orders, exchanged wary glances. Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, her face pale beneath her powder, clutched her cigarette case, her eyes darting to Paul Denton, who stood rigid by the window. Dr. Reginald Thorpe, his medical bag never far, seemed to shrink into his seat, while Miss Eliza Croft scribbled furiously in her journal, her pen scratching like an accusation. Miss Marple, knitting resumed, let her gaze linger on each, her thoughts weaving a pattern from the clues. The cyanide vial, the forged letter, the IOUs, the diary, and now this tampered brake. She recalled a Netherwood case where a jealous housekeeper had framed a gardener by planting evidence. Could someone here be orchestrating a similar deception? The note's warning suggested a calculated mind, and the brake tampering hinted at desperation to derail the investigation. Miss Marple's needles paused as she considered Miss Croft's archaeological expertise. "Miss Croft," she said softly, "you've worked with chemicals in your digs, haven't you?" Croft's pen froze. "Yes, for preserving artifacts," she snapped. "Nothing like cyanide." But her cheeks flushed, and Miss Marple noted the defensive edge, like a Netherwood schoolmistress caught fudging a ledger. Colonel Bannister, impatient, demanded a re-examination of the evidence. The whiskey glass, now under scrutiny, revealed traces of an alkaloid alongside the cyanide. A rare compound, Miss Marple learned from Thorpe's reluctant explanation, often used in archaeological preservation. Croft's flush deepened, but Miss Marple's mind turned elsewhere. The alkaloid suggested access to specialized knowledge, but also a possible misdirection. In Netherwood, a poisoned cake had been laced with 2 toxins to confuse the police. Here, the alkaloid felt like a flourish meant to mislead. As the train remained stalled, Miss Marple sought out Denton in the corridor, his nervous pacing betraying a man on edge. "You mentioned Sir Henry's will," she said, her tone disarming. "Did he name the beneficiary?" Denton's eyes flickered. He hinted it was someone close, someone he trusted too much. His voice was bitter, and Miss Marple recalled a Netherwood clerk whose envy of a favoured heir had turned to sabotage. Denton's motive, embezzlement perhaps, seemed plausible, but his lack of chemical expertise puzzled her. Mrs. Fortescue, passing by, overheard and paused, her cigarette case glinting. "Sir Henry trusted no one," she said sharply, then faltered under Miss Marple's gaze. He knew things about me, things I'd rather forget." Her admission, raw and unguarded, echoed a Netherwood widow's confession of a hidden scandal. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind circling the pearls. Fakes, Mrs. Fortescue had said, but perhaps a gift from Sir Henry, tied to his blackmail. The train jolted back to life, its whistle a sharp cry in the twilight. Miss Marple returned to the lounge, where Bannister was grilling Thorpe again. "You're vile, your father. Too many coincidences," the Colonel barked. Thorpe's protest was feeble, his hands shaking. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Mrs. Fortescue's cigarette case, a detail overlooked in the chaos. In Netherwood, a hidden compartment in a locket had held poison. Could the case conceal more than tobacco? As the passengers dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the glass, the note, the scratch on the window frame. The alkaloid was the key, she sensed, a clue pointing to someone with both opportunity and cunning. The sabotage, too, suggested a desperate hand, perhaps to delay the police. In Netherwood Parva, truth had often emerged from the mundane, a smudged cup, a whispered threat. Here, the serpent was close, its coils tightening. As the train resumed its journey, Miss Marple's knitting resumed, her fingers steady, but her mind alight with the certainty that the twist in this tale was near, and the killer's mask was about to slip. Chapter 7. Unmasking the culprit. The train to Alexandria thundered toward its destination, the Mediterranean's azure gleam now visible on the horizon, a mocking promise of escape from the confined hell of suspicion and fear. Within the dining car, transformed once more into a theatre of judgment, the passengers assembled under a pall of dread, their faces etched with exhaustion and dread. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting set aside for the first time since dawn, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her small figure radiating an unshakable calm. Colonel Bannister, red-faced and sputtering, had attempted to dominate the proceedings, but Miss Marple's gentle insistence, "If I may, Colonel, share a few thoughts," had quelled him, much as a Netherwood Parva vicar's wife might silence a parish squabble with quiet authority. The group encircled the table, Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, her once gleaming pearls dull against her ashen skin, Dr. Reginald Thorpe, hunched over his clasped hands, Mr. Victor Krasnov, arms folded like a fortress, Miss Eliza Croft, her journal snapped shut, Paul Denton, eyes hollow with unspoken guilt, and Ahmed, vigilant by the door. The air hummed with anticipation, the clink of a dropped spoon echoing like a gunshot. Miss Marple's mild blue eyes swept over them, her voice soft yet piercing. "We have all played our parts in this tragedy," she began, "but one among us scripted the finale. Human nature, you see, follows patterns, greed masked as charm, fear as innocence, like the Netherwood Parva tea party, where a borrowed brooch hid a thief's hand." She paused, letting the words settle, then gestured to the whiskey glass, now placed centrally under the chandelier's unforgiving light. Sir Henry's death was no suicide, nor a locked room mystery. The door was locked from within by the killer, using a duplicate key from the conductor's ring, slipped back during the night. Ahmed started, but Miss Marple nodded reassuringly. "No blame on you, my dear. The poison entered not through the glass alone, but via a shared remedy, headache powder, offered innocently after dinner." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Fortescue's hand flew to her throat, her cigarette case slipping to the table with a clatter. Miss Marple continued, her tone measured. Cyanide, swift and odourless in powder form, mixed with that rare alkaloid from archaeological supplies, obtained perhaps from a colleague's dig. The whisky merely dissolved it. The almond sent a deliberate flourish to suggest Thorpe's vial. Thorpe straightened, relief flickering in his eyes. Miss Marple turned to the note. Beware the serpent, penned by the murderer herself, slipped into Sir Henry's pocket during a midnight visit, mimicking a warning from Denton to deflect suspicion. Denton's jaw dropped. I wrote no such thing. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Precisely. The handwriting, analysed against your diary, matches Mrs. Fortescue's elegant script, seen in her IOUs. The widow recoiled, but Miss Marple pressed on, her deductions unfolding like a damn, well-knitted shawl. Fingerprints on the glass, smudged deliberately with a handkerchief, but traces remain. Yours, madam. Confirmed by the police kit Ahmed fetched from the baggage car. She indicated faint whirls under magnification, invisible to the untrained eye. The brake sabotage, your doing, to delay our arrival, buying time to dispose of evidence. A woman's glove fibre clings to the valve, matching your dressing gown. Colonel Bannister leaned forward, thunderstruck. But the motive? Miss Marple's gaze locked on Mrs. Fortescue. Sir Henry was no mere investor in your life. He was your first husband, abandoned in youth for a wealthier suitor. You wed again bigamously, building a facade of widowhood. Those pearls? His gift, now fakes to symbolize your shattered illusions. When he discovered your secret in Cairo, through Denton's ledgers, he threatened exposure unless you surrendered your shares in his mills. Mrs. Fortescue's composure shattered, tears carving paths through her powder. He was a monster, she cried, her voice breaking. He left me penniless, then reappeared to blackmail me. The powder was my only chance, offered as concern for his headache. I watched him drink, saw the agony, but it was justice. Her confession poured forth, raw and unbidden, echoing the Netherwood Parva housekeeper who had poisoned a tyrannical employer over years of abuse. Miss Marple nodded sadly. You planted the cyanide in Dr. Thorpe's bag during the search chaos, knowing his lineage would draw suspicion. The forged letter in Mr. Krasnov's trunk, penned by you, using ink from Croft's journal, to evoke espionage and divert to foreign intrigue. Krasnov grunted approval, Croft's eyes widening in outrage. And Denton, Miss Marple added, your argument was real, over-embezzled funds, but you exploited it, whispering threats to Ahmed for verisimilitude. Denton paled, then rallied. She confronted me last night, demanding I forge the will in her favour. I refused. That's why Sir Henry rewrote it, leaving her nothing. The pieces aligned. The new beneficiary was Thorpe, the illegitimate son, a final twist of paternal remorse. Mrs. Fortescue slumped, defeated. You see too much, old woman, like a spider in the web. Miss Marple's expression softened. Not a spider, dear, merely one who observes. In villages or on trains, folly repeats, a desperate heart, a poisoned cup. Colonel Bannister, vindicated yet humbled, signalled Ahmed. Secure her until the police board. The dining car's tension dissolved into stunned silence as the train decelerated, Alexandria's spires piercing the skyline. Whistles shrilled outside, and Egyptian constables swarmed aboard, their badges glinting. Miss Marple watched Mrs. Fortescue led away in handcuffs, her elegance stripped bare, then turned to the group. Justice at last, she murmured. Thorpe approached, gratitude in his eyes. How did you know? Miss Marple smiled. The cigarette case, doctor. When it fell, a granule of powder escaped. matching the residue on the glass. Small things, you see, betray the grandest schemes. As the police took statements, Miss Marple retrieved her knitting, the needles clicking once more in rhythmic solace. The serpent was unmasked, its venom spent, but she pondered the fragility of trust on trains, in villages, everywhere. The car emptied, leaving her with a cup of mint tea, the sea breeze wafting through open windows. Alexandria awaited, but for Miss Marple, the true journey was the unravelling of souls, thread by intricate thread. Chapter 8. Reflections by the Sea. The train's final whistle echoed across Alexandria's bustling station, where the Mediterranean's briny tang mingled with the cries of vendors hawking figs and jasmine. The passengers, released from the suffocating grip of suspicion, dispersed into the sunlit chaos, their faces a mix of relief and lingering unease. Mrs. Lydia Fortescue, now in the custody of the Egyptian police, had vanished into a waiting van, her once glamorous silhouette diminished by the weight of her confession. Miss Jane Marple, her valise in hand, stepped onto the platform, her sensible hat shielding her eyes from the glare. The case was solved, the serpent unmasked, yet her mind lingered on the delicate threads of human frailty that had woven this tragedy, much as they had in the quiet lanes of Netherwood Parva. Lady Evelyn Hargreaves's villa, perched on a cliff overlooking the azure expanse of the Mediterranean, was a haven of whitewashed walls and bougainvillea-draped terraces. Miss Marple settled into a wicker chair on the veranda, her knitting bag at her side, as Lady Evelyn poured tea from a silver pot. The sea stretched endlessly before them, its waves whispering secrets older than the pyramids. "My dear Jane," Lady Evelyn said, her eyes sparkling with admiration, "you've turned a train journey into a triumph. How ever did you see through that dreadful woman's facade?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her smile as gentle as a summer breeze. "Human nature, Evelyn, is much the same whether in a village or on a train. A glance, a gesture, a misplaced word, they betray the heart's intent. Mrs. Fortescue's pearls, you see, were her undoing, much like a Netherwood widow's borrowed brooch that revealed her theft." She sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to the dining car's charged silences, the smudged whiskey glass, the cryptic note that had unravelled a tale of betrayal. The case had crystallized in her mind during that final confrontation, when Mrs. Fortescue's cigarette case betrayed the fatal powder. Yet it was the broader tapestry that fascinated Miss Marple, the interplay of motives, Dr. Thorpe's hidden lineage seeking reconciliation, Paul Denton's resentment fueled by years of servitude, Mr. Krasnoff's buried grudge, a relic of a cheated deal, Miss Croft's fiery indignation, masking professional wounds. Each had danced on the edge of guilt, their secrets laid bare by the smallest clues, like the scratched window frame that hinted at a staged scene, or the alkaloid's archaeological trace, a misstep meant to mislead. Lady Evelyn leaned forward, her voice conspiratorial. "But the sabotage, Jane, the tampered brake, was that truly her work?" Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. Indeed, a desperate act to delay the police, giving her time to plant the forged letter in Krasnoff's trunk. She underestimated the train's mechanics, though, much as a Netherwood poacher once misjudged a trap's spring. The brake valve, she explained, bore the faint imprint of a silk glove, its fibres matching Mrs. Fortescue's dressing gown, a detail as telling as a village shopkeeper's smudged ledger. The sea breeze carried the cry of gulls, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the passengers' fates. Dr. Thorpe, now freed from suspicion, had boarded a steamer to London, his father's rewritten will naming him heir. A bittersweet legacy, she mused, like a Netherwood orphan inheriting a contested estate. Paul Denton, shaken but relieved, had confided to Miss Marple his plans to resign, seeking a quieter life away from ledgers and tyrants. Mr. Krasnov, his scar less menacing in the station's light, had vanished into Alexandria's alleys. His forged letter dismissed as evidence, but not as a warning of his own shadowed past. Miss Croft, indignant to the end, had stormed off to her symposium, vowing to protect her dig site from future magnates. Lady Evelyn refilled their cups, her brow furrowed. And the note? Beware the serpent? How did you know it was hers? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. The handwriting, my dear, matched her IOUs, and the biblical flourish was too deliberate, like a Netherwood spinster's anonymous letter meant to stir scandal. Mrs. Fortescue crafted it to point to Denton, but her own hand betrayed her, as hands often do. She recalled the cigarette case's hidden compartment, a tiny hinge revealing a granule of cyanide-laced powder, overlooked by Colonel Bannister's bluster, but not by her own quiet scrutiny. The villa's clock chimed, its notes soft against the sea's rhythm. Miss Marple reflected on the train's microcosm, a mirror of village life where ambition, fear, and shame collided. Mrs. Fortescue's crime, born of a youthful marriage abandoned and a life rebuilt on lies, was a tragedy of desperation. She loved Sir Henry once, Miss Marple mused aloud, but love curdles when trust is broken. In Netherwood, a jilted seamstress once poisoned her rival's tea. Here, the stakes were grander, but the heart's wound was the same. Lady Evelyn shivered despite the warmth. You make it sound almost poetic, Jane. Miss Marple shook her head. Not poetic, merely human. We weave our own traps, greed, pride, secrets, and stumble into them. My part is only to observe, to see the pattern. She thought of the whiskey glass. It smudges a map of deceit. The scratched window, a feint to suggest an impossible crime. The alkaloid, a scholar's tool turned deadly. Each clue, small as a village gossip's whisper, had led to truth. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sea in hues of gold and crimson, Lady Evelyn pressed for more. Will you stay long, Jane? Alexandria has its own mysteries. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their dance. A week, perhaps. The sea air is bracing, but I suspect Netherwood Parva will call me back. There's always a garden to weed, a secret to unearth. She pictured her cottage, its roses and scandals waiting, and felt a pang of fondness for its predictable dramas. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a counterpoint to the villa's tranquillity. Miss Marple's mind, ever restless, traced the case's echoes. The passengers' faces, each a mask of motive, now scattered to their fates. The train, a fleeting stage for their collision. And Mrs. Fortescue, her elegance undone by a single granule of truth. In Netherwood Parva, she had learned that justice was not triumph, but restoration. A balance righted, a shadow dispelled. Here, by the sea, she felt the same quiet satisfaction, tempered by sorrow for a life lost to its own unravelling. Lady Evelyn rose, promising a tour of Alexandria's antiquities tomorrow. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts already drifting to the next journey, the next puzzle. As the stars began to prick the twilight sky, she gathered her knitting, her fingers steady, her heart attuned to the eternal rhythm of human folly. The sea whispered on, and Miss Marple, ever the observer, knew that wherever she went, village or city, train or shore, the threads of truth would await her deft touch.